On a cold Tuesday morning in Chicago, as snow melted slowly along the edges of sidewalks and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee escaped from avenue cafes, Marshall Townsend approached the main entrance of an imposing commercial building in the city's financial center. His tailored charcoal suit hugged his broad shoulders perfectly, and despite the biting wind, his posture remained unwavering. The lobby, with its modern facade of mirrored glass and light marble, displayed the typical bustling rhythm of executives coming and going. However, as soon as Marshall attempted to cross through the revolving doors, he was interrupted by a security guard who, without lifting his eyes from his cell phone, pointed to a sign nearby and said firmly, "Deliveries are through the back door." The reaction was one of loaded silence. Marshall, a black man with measured speech and contained gestures, hesitated. For a second, he considered identifying himself. But, with a slight smile at the corner of his mouth, he simply turned around and walked calmly to the opposite side of the building, as if he hadn't taken offense. The cold wind cut across his face, and the city sound seemed distant. No one there knew yet, but this man wasn't a delivery person. He was the new owner of the building, and he was about to make his first official visit after finalizing a complex acquisition negotiation. Time seemed to slow as Marshall walked around the perimeter of the gleaming 50-story tower that now belonged to him. His leather shoes crunched against the salt-strewn pavement, and his breath formed small clouds in the winter air. He ran his fingers along the cold stone exterior, feeling the texture of what was now his. Not just an investment, but a statement, a testament to how far he had come from the South Side neighborhood where he'd grown up. The service entrance was tucked away in an alley, sheltered from the busy street. The difference was immediate and stark. Gone was the polished marble and gleaming glass. Here, the walls were functional concrete, illuminated by fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered. Delivery trucks idled, exhaust mingling with the scent of garbage from nearby dumpsters. Workers in uniforms hurried past with carts and dollies, barely glancing at Marshall as he entered. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair sat behind a battered metal desk, checking packages against a clipboard. She looked up as Marshall approached, her expression neutral but attentive. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight accent that hinted at Eastern European origins. "I'm here to meet with Barbara Henderson from Wiley & Associates," Marshall replied, his voice smooth and controlled. "I believe they're expecting me on the executive floor." The woman, Elena, according to her name tag, studied him for a moment. Unlike the front desk guard, she looked directly into his eyes, assessing rather than assuming. "You're Mr. Townsend?" she asked. A flicker of surprise crossed Marshall's face. "Yes, I am." Elena smiled, warm lines crinkling around her eyes. "Ms. Henderson called down. Said you might come this way. I'll notify her you're here." She reached for a phone. "Though I have to say, most big shots don't know this entrance exists." Marshall returned her smile. "I found it's good to know all the entrances and exits, Elena. And to remember that some doors are harder to get through than others." If you're connecting with Marshall's story already and appreciate narratives about dignity in the face of prejudice, please hit that subscribe button and join our community of storytellers and listeners who believe in the power of human resilience. As Elena made the call, Marshall glanced around the back entrance area. A bulletin board covered with employee notices caught his eye. Amid the mundane announcements and safety regulations were photos from what appeared to be a holiday party. He stepped closer, examining the faces of the people who worked in his building, faces of every shade and from every corner of the world. The front entrance presented one face of Lakeside Tower. This entrance revealed its true heart. 10 minutes later, Marshall stood in the top-floor conference room, looking out over Lake Michigan. The water stretched like polished steel under the winter sky, distant boats leaving faint trails in their wake. Behind him, Barbara Henderson from Wiley & Associates was laying out documents on the gleaming table, the final paperwork that would complete the transfer of ownership. "Everything is in order, Mr. Townsend," she said, her crisp efficiency matched by her perfectly pressed suit. "Once you sign, Lakeside Tower is officially yours." She paused, studying him with professional curiosity. "If you don't mind my asking, why did you come up through the service entrance?" There was a small reception planned in the main lobby. Marshall turned from the window, his reflection ghosting against the cityscape behind him. "Let's just say I wanted to see the building from all angles before making it mine." Before Barbara could respond, the conference room door opened, and a small entourage entered. Leading them was a tall man with silver hair and a commanding presence, Robert Whitfield, the building's longtime manager. "Mr. Townsend, we've been looking for you downstairs," Whitfield said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Lakeside Tower. Or should I say, your Lakeside Tower." His smile was practiced, professional, but didn't quite reach his eyes. Marshall shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. I was just telling Ms. Henderson that I wanted to get a complete picture of the building operations." "Well, you certainly won't get that from the service area," Whitfield chuckled, his tone dismissive. "Now, shall we proceed with a formal introduction to the executive staff? Everyone is eager to meet the man who managed to acquire Chicago's most prestigious commercial address." Marshall nodded, but his mind flashed back to the security guard who had so casually dismissed him. "Actually, before we do that, I'd like to meet with your security team as well." "All of them?" Whitfield blinked, momentarily thrown off script. "The security team? I assure you they're excellent, thoroughly vetted by my office personally." "Is there a concern?" "No concern," Marshall said smoothly. "Just part of getting that complete picture." The meeting with the executive staff went exactly as Marshall had anticipated. Polished smiles, firm handshakes, and carefully worded welcomes that masked the underlying uncertainty about what changes might come with new ownership. Marshall had been in enough boardrooms to recognize the subtle signs of people calculating how to position themselves advantageously in a shifting power structure. Afterward, Whitfield attempted to steer him toward a catered lunch in the executive dining room, but Marshall remained firm. "The security team, Mr. Whitfield. I'd like to meet them now." Reluctantly, Whitfield led him to the security office on the ground floor. The room was utilitarian, monitors showing feeds from dozens of cameras throughout the building, a dispatch radio crackling with occasional updates, and half a dozen uniformed guards in various states of attention. Among them was the man from the front entrance. "This is our security staff, Mr. Townsend," Whitfield said with professional courtesy that couldn't quite hide his confusion about Marshall's interest. "Frank Morgan is our chief of security." He gestured to a stocky man with a military bearing who stepped forward immediately. "A pleasure to meet you, sir," Morgan said, shaking Marshall's hand. "We're proud of our record here at Lakeside. 0 major incidents in 5 years." Marshall nodded appreciatively. "Impressive. And your team? Would you introduce them?" As Morgan went through the names, Marshall observed the growing recognition on the face of the guard from earlier, James Peterson, according to his introduction. When the introductions were complete, Marshall thanked them all for their service to the building. "I have a question," Marshall said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "What criteria do you use to determine who uses the service entrance versus the main entrance?" The question hung in the air. Morgan looked confused. "Sir, it's a simple question," Marshall continued, his tone conversational but firm. "How do you decide who belongs in the front and who belongs in the back?" Morgan straightened, clearly sensing a challenge. "We have protocols, sir. Deliveries, maintenance, custodial services use the service entrance. Tenants, their employees, and visitors use the main entrance." "And how do you identify who falls into which category?" The room had grown uncomfortably silent. Peterson had gone pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. Morgan hesitated. Uniforms, packages, equipment, or building ID for regular staff. "I see," Marshall said. "And what about someone like me? How would you categorize me, seeing me approach the building this morning?" "We all face moments where we're judged based on appearance rather than character. Has something like this ever happened to you? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help others feel less alone in their struggles." Before Morgan could answer, Peterson stepped forward. "Sir, I made a mistake this morning," he said, his voice strained but determined. "I directed you to the service entrance without properly assessing the situation. It was unprofessional, and I apologize." Marshall studied him for a long moment. The room was so quiet that the hum of the electronics seemed thunderous. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you for acknowledging that, Mr. Peterson. I appreciate honesty." He turned to address the entire security team. "I believe in second chances, but I also believe in accountability. Lakeside Tower is now my building, and in my building, we will judge people by their character and their actions, not by assumptions based on appearance. Is that clear? A chorus of, "Yes, sir," echoed in the small room. Good. Mr. Morgan, I'd like a review of all security protocols on my desk by the end of the week. Marshall turned to leave, then paused. And Mr. Peterson, I'll see you tomorrow morning. I believe we have some further discussion ahead of us. As Marshall walked away, Whitfield hurried to catch up with him. Mr. Townsend, I had no idea there was an incident this morning. I assure you, this isn't how we operate. Marshall faced him. But it is, Mr. Whitfield. Maybe not officially, maybe not in your handbook, but in practice? It happened within minutes of my arrival. Which makes me wonder what else happens in this building that you're not aware of. Throughout the afternoon, Marshall methodically worked his way through the building, starting from the bottom floor and working upward. He spoke with maintenance staff in the basement, who showed him the aging boiler system that struggled during Chicago's harsh winters. He visited the mailroom, where employees sorted through mountains of correspondence for the building's many corporate tenants. On each floor, he introduced himself to receptionists, office managers, and any employees he encountered in common areas. By late afternoon, word had spread throughout the building about the new owner who was actually talking to everyone, not just executives. When Marshall entered the small accounting firm on the 24th floor, the receptionist, a woman in her 60s with elegantly coiffed silver hair, smiled knowingly. "You must be Mr. Townsend," she said. "Doris Williams. Everyone's talking about you." Marshall chuckled. "All good things, I hope?" "Mostly surprise," Doris replied frankly. The previous owner only came by for the annual holiday reception, and even then, he barely spoke to anyone below executive level. "Well, I find you learn more about a place by talking to the people who make it run every day." Doris leaned forward slightly. "Then you might want to talk to Elena down at the service entrance. She's been here since the building opened 30 years ago. Knows more about this place than anyone." Marshall smiled. "Actually, Elena was the first person to greet me properly today. I think you're right, I should have a longer conversation with her." As the workday drew to a close, Marshall made his way back to the service entrance. The rush of deliveries had ended, and Elena was organizing her desk for the end of her shift. She looked up in surprise as Marshall approached. "Mr. Townsend, didn't expect to see you again today. Everything okay with the big meeting?" "The meeting went fine," Marshall replied, leaning comfortably against her desk. "I've been touring the building, getting to know the place. Your name keeps coming up." Elena raised an eyebrow. "Does it now? Should I be worried?" "Quite the opposite. Everyone says you're the person who really knows this building." Elena smiled, a hint of pride crossing her face. 30 years will do that. I've seen 5 owners come and go. Seen the neighborhood change. Seen technology change everything about how business gets done. But some things stay the same. "Like what?" "Like people," she said simply. "Different clothes, different tools, but people are still people. Some good, some not so good. Some who see you, some who look right through you." Marshall nodded slowly. "You saw me today." "Not many did." "I've been looked through enough times to know how it feels," Elena replied. "When I started here, I was a young immigrant with broken English. Some people would change their voice when talking to me, like I was deaf instead of just learning their language. Some would get impatient, talk to my supervisor instead. But the ones who took the time to see me, I never forgot them." Marshall studied her, seeing the wisdom earned through decades of quiet observation. "Elena, would you have dinner with me?" "Not tonight. I know you're heading home. But sometime this week. I'd like to hear more about your perspective on Lakeside Tower." Elena looked surprised, then thoughtful. "You know what? I would like that, Mr. Townsend. Most owners want to know about the building's finances, not its heart. Please, call me Marshall. And I think understanding its heart might be the best investment I can make." If you're finding value in this journey of recognition and respect, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring more stories of dignity and transformation to listeners everywhere. That night, in his downtown apartment, Marshall stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. Chicago sprawled before him, a glittering grid of possibilities and challenges. In the distance, he could just make out the silhouette of Lakeside Tower, now his in more than just legal documents. He sipped his whiskey, letting the warmth spread through him as memories surfaced from his childhood. Growing up on the South Side hadn't been easy. His father, a skilled carpenter, had struggled to find clients who would trust a black man with their high-end renovations. His mother had worked double shifts as a nurse to help make ends meet. They had instilled in him an unshakable sense of dignity and pride in his work, regardless of how others might see him. He remembered accompanying his father to a job in a wealthy neighborhood when he was 10 years old. They had entered through a service entrance, just like the one at Lakeside. "Why do we have to come in this way, Dad?" he had asked. His father had looked at him steadily. "Because that's what they expect. But remember this, Marshall, no door can make you less than what you are. And someday, you'll walk through any door you choose." Marshall raised his glass in a silent toast to his father's memory. "I'm walking through them all now, Dad, and making sure they stay open for others." His phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen showed Alyssa Townsend, his daughter, in her second year at Northwestern. He answered immediately. "Hey, sweetheart. How's my favorite scholar?" "Dad, I just heard about Lakeside Tower from Uncle James. Why didn't you tell me the deal closed today?" Marshall smiled at her excitement. "I was going to call you tonight. It's been a full day of meetings and building tours." "And how does it feel to own one of the most prestigious addresses in Chicago?" He paused, considering. "It feels like responsibility and opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" Alyssa asked, curiosity in her voice. "To change things. To make sure people are seen for who they are, not what they look like or what job they do." There was a moment of silence on the line. Then, softly, "Did something happen, Dad?" Marshall sighed. His daughter knew him too well. "Nothing I haven't dealt with before. Just another reminder of why this matters." "Someone mistook you for staff again?" Her voice held a familiar mixture of anger and resignation. "Security guard thought I was a delivery person." "In your Armani suit? With your briefcase?" Alyssa's voice rose incredulously. "Well, to be fair, he didn't really look at me," Marshall replied, trying to keep his tone light. "That's not fair at all," Alyssa retorted. "What did you do?" "For now, I've asked for a review of security protocols. Tomorrow, I'll have a more thorough conversation with him." "You should fire him." Marshall moved away from the window, settling into his leather armchair. "That's one approach. But I'm considering something that might have more impact." "Like what?" "I'm still working that out. But firing one person doesn't change a culture. I want to do something more lasting." Alyssa was quiet for a moment. "That's why you're the best, Dad. You always see the bigger picture." She paused. "Mom would be proud of you today." The mention of his late wife sent a familiar pang through Marshall's chest. Christine had been gone for 5 years now, taken by the same aggressive cancer that had claimed her mother. She had been his partner in everything, from raising Alyssa to building his real estate development company from the ground up. "I wish she was here to see it," he said softly. "She is, in a way," Alyssa replied. "Every time you do something like this, something that makes the world a little more fair, that's her legacy too." After saying good night to his daughter, Marshall returned to the window. Christine had always been his moral compass, the one who pushed him to use his success for more than just accumulating wealth. "It's not enough to get through the door," she would say. "You have to hold it open for others." Tomorrow, he would begin figuring out how to do just that at Lakeside Tower. The next morning dawned gray and threatening snow. Marshall arrived at Lakeside Tower precisely at 8, deliberately approaching the main entrance again. The lobby was busy with the morning rush of employees heading to their offices. At the security desk, James Peterson straightened as he saw Marshall approach. Today, his eyes were alert and focused, his posture tense. "Good morning, Mr. Townsend," he said formally. "Mr. Peterson," Marshall acknowledged with a nod. "I believe we have a meeting scheduled." "Yes, sir. Mr. Morgan has arranged for us to use the security office." Marshall shook his head. I'd prefer somewhere less official. Is there a coffee shop in the building? Peterson looked surprised. Yes, sir. The Lakeside Cafe on the mezzanine level. Perfect. Let's talk there. The cafe was a bright space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the building's central atrium. At this hour, it was busy with people grabbing breakfast or having early meetings. Marshall and Peterson found a relatively private table in the corner. The security guard sat stiffly, as if expecting a formal reprimand. Marshall studied him for a moment. Peterson appeared to be in his late 30s, with the bearing of someone with military experience. His uniform was impeccably maintained, and despite his obvious discomfort, his demeanor was professional. Relax, Mr. Peterson. This isn't a firing squad, Marshall said, taking a sip of his coffee. Peterson didn't look convinced. Sir, I want to apologize again for yesterday. It was unprofessional and... Marshall held up a hand. I accepted your apology yesterday. What I'm more interested in now is understanding why it happened. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. I made an assumption. A wrong one. Based on what? The security guard hesitated. I don't know, sir. It was busy, I was distracted with another issue, and I just assumed. Let me be direct, Marshall said, leaning forward slightly. Was it because I'm black? Peterson's face flushed. He looked down at his untouched coffee, then met Marshall's gaze. I want to say no, because I don't think of myself as that kind of person. But if I'm being honest, maybe that was part of it. Not consciously, but... Marshall nodded, appreciating the difficult honesty. Thank you for that. It's not an easy thing to acknowledge. Are you going to request my termination? Peterson asked quietly. Is that what you think should happen? Peterson straightened his shoulders. I would understand if you did. What I did violated our professional standards. Marshall considered him thoughtfully. Tell me about your background, Mr. Peterson. How did you come to work in security? Looking slightly thrown by the change in direction, Peterson responded, I was in the army for 12 years. 2 tours in Afghanistan. When I got out, security work seemed like a natural fit. I've been at Lakeside for about 3 years now. And do you like it here? Yes, sir. It's a good building, good people. All the people. Even the ones who come through the service entrance. Peterson's expression shifted to one of genuine reflection. I haven't really thought about it that way before. That's part of the problem, isn't it? Marshall said gently. Some people are noticed, valued, greeted by name. Others are practically invisible, directed to the back, not really seen as individuals. Have you ever had a conversation that changed your perspective on something important? Tell us in the comments about a time when someone's words made you see the world differently. Peterson was silent for a long moment, processing. Finally, he said, I never thought of it as making people invisible. I just thought I was doing my job, following protocols. The problem with protocols, Marshall replied, is that they often encode biases we don't even recognize. They become ways of maintaining systems that sort people into categories, those who belong and those who don't. Marshall watched understanding dawn slowly in Peterson's eyes. So what happens now, sir? That depends on you, Mr. Peterson. I could fire you, as my daughter suggested last night. But that would be easy and ultimately change nothing. The next person in your position might make the same assumptions, follow the same unwritten rules. Peterson winced at the mention of Marshall's daughter but said nothing. Instead, Marshall continued, I'm considering a different approach. I'm creating a new position, Director of Community Relations for Lakeside Tower. This person will be responsible for reviewing and revising all protocols that affect how people are treated in this building, from security procedures to maintenance requests to tenant interactions. They'll develop training programs for all building staff and create new standards that emphasize dignity and respect for everyone who walks through our doors, any of our doors. Peterson looked confused. That sounds like a good idea, sir, but what does it have to do with me? I'm offering you the job, Mr. Peterson. The security guard's mouth actually fell open. Me? But I'm the one who made a mistake, acknowledged it honestly, and now has the opportunity to help prevent others from making the same one, Marshall finished for him. Your military background gives you leadership experience. Your security work has taught you about the building's operations. And yesterday's incident gives you a personal understanding of why this matters. Peterson stared at him in disbelief. I don't know what to say, sir. You don't have to decide immediately. Think about it. Talk it over with your family. This would be a significant change in responsibilities. But I believe that sometimes, the people who have the most to teach are those who have learned from their mistakes. As they left the cafe, Peterson still looking stunned, Marshall added, one more thing. If you take this position, your first assignment will be to spend a day working with Elena at the service entrance. I think you might gain some valuable perspective there. Throughout the day, Marshall continued his methodical exploration of Lakeside Tower, meeting with the managers of different departments and talking with tenants. By late afternoon, he had a clearer picture of both the building's strengths and its challenges. The physical infrastructure needed significant updates, the heating system was inefficient, the elevators were outdated, and the technological infrastructure lagged behind competitor buildings. But the more pressing issues were cultural. There was a stark division between the front-of-house operations, which catered to executives and clients, and the back-of-house staff who kept everything running. It wasn't just about the different entrances. It was about who was valued, who was listened to, who was invested in. As scheduled, Marshall met Elena for dinner at a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from Lakeside Tower. She arrived wearing a simple but elegant dress, her silver-streaked hair arranged differently than it had been at work. You clean up nice, she said with a smile as she sat down across from him. Though I recognized you just fine yesterday, fancy suit and all. Marshall laughed. I appreciate that. And thank you for agreeing to this dinner. I know it's unusual. Unusual is interesting at my age, Elena replied, unfolding her napkin. What exactly did you want to talk about, Marshall? Over appetizers, Marshall shared his observations about the building and his ideas for changes. Elena listened attentively, occasionally nodding or adding a comment. You've noticed a lot in just 2 days, she said as their main courses arrived. It took the last owner 2 years to realize the boiler was a problem, and even then, he only addressed it when pipes burst on the executive floor. I've always believed in seeing things as they are, not just as they appear on paper, Marshall replied. But what I really want to know is your perspective. 30 years is a long time to observe a place. What have you seen change, and what needs to change? Elena took a thoughtful sip of her wine. The building was different when I started. Smaller companies, more family businesses. People knew each other. The executives knew the maintenance staff by name. Now, it's all big corporations. More prestigious, sure, but also more separated. The higher up you go in the building, the less people know about what happens on the lower floors. And how does that affect how people are treated? Some are treated like they matter. Others like they're invisible, Elena said matter-of-factly. I notice it most with the cleaning staff. They're mostly immigrants, like I was. Work the night shift. Most tenants never even see them, but they complain quickly if a trash can isn't emptied or a bathroom isn't spotless. Marshall nodded. What would you change if you could? Elena considered the question seriously. I'd make people see each other. Really see each other. And I'd fix that service entrance. It's always too cold in winter and too hot in summer. The front lobby got renovated 3 times in 30 years. The back. Not once. That's very insightful, Elena. Actually, I'd like to offer you a role in helping shape these changes. Elena's eyebrows rose. Me? I'm just the service desk supervisor. You're the heart of the building, from what everyone tells me. You know every delivery person, every maintenance worker, every cleaner. You speak, what, for languages? 5 actually, Elena said with a hint of pride. English, Polish, Spanish, Russian, and a little Mandarin. You pick things up over the years. Exactly. You've built relationships across every level of building operations. I'm creating a community relations team to help transform how Lakeside Tower functions, and I'd like you to be part of it. For the first time, Elena looked genuinely surprised. At my age, I'm retiring in 2 years. All the more reason to share your wisdom while you're still here, Marshall said. Think about it. The position would come with a significant raise, by the way. Elena's expression turned shrewd. Now you're speaking my language. My grandson starts college next year. Consider it an investment in the future, his and Lakeside's. If you're inspired by Elena's wisdom and Marshall's approach to creating meaningful change, hit that subscribe button to support more stories that celebrate dignity and human connection. By the end of dinner, Elena had conditionally accepted the position, pending details about hours and responsibilities. As they were leaving the restaurant, she paused. You know, when you came in through the service entrance yesterday, I thought you might be different from the other owners. Now I'm sure of it. She patted his arm. Just don't lose that perspective when you start spending more time on the top floor. I'll consider that my first piece of advice from my new community relations advisor, Marshall replied with a smile. Over the next several days, Marshall continued gathering information and forming plans for Lakeside Tower. He met with architects to discuss renovations that would equalize conditions between the main and service areas. He reviewed tenant leases, service contracts, and employee policies. And he had conversations, dozens of them, with people at every level of the building's operations. 1 week after his acquisition of the building, Marshall called a meeting with Robert Whitfield, the building manager, and Frank Morgan, the security chief. Whitfield arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed as always, with Morgan a respectful 2 steps behind. Gentlemen, thank you for coming, Marshall said, gesturing them to seats in the conference room. I've spent the past week getting to know Lakeside Tower, not just its financial statements and occupancy rates, but its people and its culture. Whitfield nodded approvingly. A thorough approach. I've heard positive feedback from several tenants about your visibility. I'm glad to hear that. And now I'd like to share some of my initial plans for changes to building operations. Marshall opened a folder on the table. First, I'm creating a new department, Community Relations, that will report directly to me. James Peterson and Elena Novak have agreed to head this team. Morgan sat up straighter. Peterson, my security officer. Former security officer, Marshall corrected. He's accepted the new position, effective immediately. I'll need you to adjust your staffing accordingly. Morgan looked displeased but nodded curtly. Whitfield's expression was carefully neutral. May I ask what this new department will be responsible for? Improving how people experience Lakeside Tower, all people, at every level. They'll review and revise protocols, develop training programs, and implement new standards for how we treat everyone who enters our building. That sounds extensive, Whitfield said cautiously. And potentially costly. It is both of those things, Marshall agreed. Which brings me to my next point. I've reviewed the capital improvement budget, and I'm making significant changes. The executive floor renovation scheduled for this quarter is being postponed. Instead, those funds will be directed toward upgrading the service entrance area, improving the employee break rooms, and addressing the heating issues in the lower levels. Now Whitfield looked actively concerned. Mr. Townsend, while those are admirable priorities, the executive floor renovation was promised to our premium tenants. Westridge Partners specifically mentioned it as a factor in their recent lease renewal. I'm aware of that. I've already spoken with the managing partners at Westridge. When I explained that their employees would benefit from better climate control and improved facilities, they were quite supportive. Marshall smiled slightly. Apparently, their staff has been complaining about the temperature fluctuations for years. Morgan cleared his throat. Sir, regarding the security protocols that you asked me to review, I have those ready for you. Excellent. Please share them with Peterson. He'll be working with you to implement appropriate changes. Morgan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. One last item, Marshall continued. I'm instituting a new policy regarding the building entrances. Effective immediately, all entrances will be open to all legitimate building users. The distinction between main and service will be geographical only, not functional. Sir, Morgan began, that creates significant security challenges. Our current system allows us to control who goes where based on appearance and assumption, Marshall finished for him. I understand the security concerns, Mr. Morgan. That's why Peterson will be working with you to develop new protocols that maintain security without maintaining arbitrary distinctions between who is front door material and who isn't. Whitfield leaned forward. Mr. Townsend, while I appreciate your idealism, I feel obligated to point out that there are practical realities to running a building of this caliber. Our premium tenants expect a certain environment, a certain exclusivity. What they expect, Marshall countered, is a building that functions efficiently, treats their employees well, and reflects positively on their corporate image. I believe these changes will accomplish all of those goals better than the current system. He closed his folder decisively. I've scheduled a building-wide meeting for next Monday morning to announce these changes. I'd like both of you to be there, presenting a united front with me, regardless of any reservations you may have. After they left, Marshall remained in the conference room, looking out at the city below. He had expected resistance, especially from Whitfield, who had managed Lakeside according to the old owner's priorities for nearly a decade. Change wouldn't happen overnight. But it would happen. His phone rang, Alyssa again. Hey, Dad. How's the building revolution going? Marshall chuckled. One meeting at a time. Just finished telling Whitfield and Morgan about the new community relations department and the entrance policy changes. And did they fall to their knees in gratitude for your progressive leadership? Not exactly. But they'll come around. Or they won't, and they'll find other opportunities. That's my ruthless businessman father, Alyssa teased. Hey, I had an idea I wanted to run by you. For my social policy class, we need to do a case study on organizational change. I was thinking Lakeside could be perfect, if you'd be okay with me interviewing you and some of the staff over the next few weeks. Marshall hesitated. He had always kept his business dealings separate from Alyssa's education, wanting her to make her own way without trading on his name. But this was different. This was about principles they both believed in. I think that would be excellent, he said finally. You should start with Elena at the service entrance. She's got 30 years of perspective that would be valuable for your project. Thanks, Dad. I'll come by tomorrow afternoon. Love you. Love you too, sweetheart. As he hung up, Marshall felt a renewed sense of purpose. His changes at Lakeside weren't just about making a statement or righting a personal wrong. They were about creating a model that others might follow, including, perhaps, his daughter in her future career. Have you ever had to change an established culture or tradition? Share your experience in the comments about what worked, what didn't, and what you learned in the process. Over the weekend, Marshall prepared for Monday's announcement meeting. He worked with Peterson and Elena to develop a presentation that would explain the changes clearly while emphasizing the benefits for everyone in the building. He also took time to visit his parents, who still lived in the same South Side house where he had grown up. His father, Thomas Townsend, now 75, sat in his familiar armchair, his carpenter's hands gnarled with arthritis but still strong. His mother, Grace, moved more slowly these days but still insisted on cooking Sunday dinner for her son whenever he visited. So you own that fancy downtown building now, Thomas said, pride evident in his voice despite his attempt at a casual tone. The one with the blue glass at the top? That's the one, Dad, Marshall confirmed, helping his mother set the table. Lakeside Tower. And how's it feel? Being the boss of all those executives who wouldn't give you the time of day a few years back. Marshall considered the question as he arranged silverware. It feels like responsibility, and like a chance to change things that need changing. Grace brought a steaming casserole to the table. Like what kind of things? Over dinner, Marshall shared the story of his first day at Lakeside and his plans for transformation. His parents exchanged a look he couldn't quite interpret. What? He asked. You don't think it's a good idea? His father set down his fork. It's a fine idea. But be careful, son. People don't like change, especially when it challenges their sense of how things ought to be. How they think the world is ordered. Your father's right, Grace added. When he started his own carpentry business, trying to get contracts in the white neighborhoods, it wasn't just about proving his skills. It was about changing people's minds about who belongs where, doing what kind of work. Thomas nodded. And some minds don't want to be changed. Some people will smile to your face and undermine you behind your back. I know that, Marshall said. I've been dealing with it my whole career. "This is different," his father insisted. "Before, you were playing their game, just playing it better. Now you're trying to change the rules. That makes you more of a threat." Marshall absorbed his father's warning. "So what should I do? Back down? Go slower?" Thomas shook his head. "No. I'm just saying be prepared. Watch your back. And remember that real change takes time and persistence. It's not about one big announcement or one new policy. It's about showing up, day after day, and being who you are without apology." Grace reached across the table to squeeze Marshall's hand. "You have your father's stubborn determination and my strategic patience. You'll find the right balance." As Marshall drove home that evening, his parents' words echoed in his mind. They had experienced decades of exclusion and prejudice, had fought their battles with dignity and perseverance. His father was right. Changing Lakeside Tower wouldn't happen overnight. But it would happen, one day, one decision, one person at a time. Monday morning arrived with a late winter storm. Heavy snow fell across Chicago, turning the commute into a slow-motion ballet of traffic and delays. Marshall arrived at Lakeside Tower early, wanting to check that everything was ready for the building-wide meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. In the lobby, he found Peterson directing additional security staff who were helping people brush snow from their coats and directing the increased flow of arrivals to the appropriate elevator banks. When Peterson saw Marshall, he straightened and approached with a new confidence. "Good morning, Mr. Townsend. We've adjusted staffing to accommodate the weather and the meeting. Elena is at the service entrance doing the same." "Excellent thinking, Mr. Peterson. How are you settling into your new role?" "It's challenging, sir, but in a good way. Elena's been an incredible resource. I spent Friday working with her at the service entrance, as you suggested. It was eye-opening." Marshall nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what I was hoping for. Are we set for the meeting?" "Yes, sir. The main atrium is prepared. We're expecting about 300 people based on RSVPs, plus whoever can tune in to the video feed from their offices." The atrium was Lakeside's most distinctive architectural feature, a soaring space that rose through the first 4 floors, surrounded by balconies and flooded with natural light from a massive skylight. Today, despite the snow outside, it was set up with chairs facing a small stage where Marshall would make his announcements. By 8:45, people had begun to gather. Marshall observed from a discreet corner, watching the natural segregation that occurred. Executives and professional staff clustered in the front rows, dressed in suits and business attire. Maintenance and security personnel stood in groups near the back, many still in their uniforms. The division wasn't enforced, no one was directing people where to sit, but it happened nonetheless, an unconscious reflection of the building's existing hierarchy. At precisely 9 a.m., Robert Whitfield stepped onto the stage to introduce Marshall. His words were professionally appropriate, welcoming the new owner and highlighting Lakeside Tower's prestigious history. Marshall noted, however, the careful neutrality in Whitfield's tone, neither endorsing nor opposing what was to come. As Marshall took the stage, he surveyed the gathering. In the front row, he recognized the senior partners from the major tenant firms, watching him with evaluative expressions. Near the back, he spotted Elena, who gave him an encouraging nod. And scattered throughout were the hundreds of people who made Lakeside function day after day, people whose names he was still learning, whose contributions often went unrecognized. "Good morning," he began. "Thank you all for coming, especially on such a challenging weather day. I'm Marshall Townsend, and as of last week, I'm the new owner of Lakeside Tower. But this building doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to all of us who work here, who spend our days within these walls, who contribute to its operations and its atmosphere." He paused, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. "Over the past week, I've been getting to know Lakeside, not just as a property or an investment, but as a community. I've spoken with many of you, from the executive offices to the boiler room, and I've observed how this building functions, both its strengths and its challenges." Marshall moved away from the podium, taking a more conversational position at the front of the stage. "Today, I want to share my vision for Lakeside Tower's future and announce some immediate changes that will begin to move us in that direction." For the next 20 minutes, Marshall outlined his plans, starting with the formation of the Community Relations Department and introducing Peterson and Elena as its leaders. He announced the shifted renovation priorities, emphasizing how the improvements to infrastructure would benefit all tenants. And he explained the new entrance policy, framing it as both a matter of efficiency and of principle. In Lakeside Tower, he concluded, we will be a community that recognizes the dignity and value of every person who walks through our doors, any of our doors. We will be a place where excellence means not just prestigious addresses and impressive architecture, but also how we treat each other every day at every level. This transformation won't happen overnight. It will require commitment, openness to change, and occasionally, discomfort. But I believe the Lakeside community is capable of this evolution, and I look forward to undertaking it together. The applause that followed was polite but mixed. Some sections responded enthusiastically, particularly those standing near the back. Others, notably including several executive rows, offered more restrained acknowledgement. As people began to disperse, Marshall remained on stage, making himself available for questions and comments. If you believe in the importance of creating workplaces where everyone is treated with dignity, take a second to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire positive change in our communities. A line formed quickly. The first to approach was a woman in her 50s, dressed in the uniform of the building's custodial staff. She seemed nervous but determined. Mr. Townsend, I'm Maria Gonzalez, lead supervisor for the night cleaning crew. I just wanted to say thank you. For 30 years, we've used the service entrance, even though we're here every night, even though some of us have been in this building longer than most of the executives. It means something, what you said today. Marshall shook her hand warmly. Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. I'd like to talk more with you about your team's experiences and needs. Would you have time this week to meet? She looked surprised but pleased. Yes, of course. Anytime. Next came a stream of building employees and tenant representatives, some offering support, others expressing concerns or asking clarifying questions. Marshall answered each thoughtfully, taking notes when appropriate, and directing specific operational questions to Peterson or Elena, who stood nearby. Near the end of the line was a man Marshall recognized as Jonathan Bennett, managing partner at Westridge Partners, one of Lakeside's most prestigious tenants. Bennett was in his 60s, with the polished appearance and confident bearing of someone accustomed to power and deference. Mr. Townsend, he began, his tone cordial but reserved, an interesting presentation. I appreciate your enthusiasm for creating a positive environment at Lakeside. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I understand Westridge has been a tenant here for over a decade. Indeed. And we've always valued the professional atmosphere and exclusive address that Lakeside provides our clients. Bennett lowered his voice slightly. Which is why I wanted to speak with you directly about some of these changes. While the infrastructure improvements sound necessary, I'm concerned about this new entrance policy. Our clients expect a certain experience when they visit our offices, an experience that begins the moment they enter the building. Marshall nodded, keeping his expression open. I understand your concern. May I ask, what specific aspects of that experience do you feel might be compromised? Bennett hesitated, clearly searching for words that wouldn't sound obviously elitist. It's about first impressions, Mr. Townsend. When high-net-worth clients arrive for meetings about their financial futures, they expect an environment that reflects quality and discretion. And you're concerned they might encounter delivery personnel or maintenance staff in the lobby? Put simply, yes, Bennett admitted. Mr. Bennett, I respect your candor. And I assure you that the professional appearance and security of Lakeside will remain priorities. What will change is the assumption that someone's role or appearance determines which door they're allowed to use. Marshall smiled slightly. After all, I was directed to the service entrance on my first visit here last week. I'd hate for one of your high-net-worth clients to have a similar experience. Bennett looked startled. I had no idea. That's completely unacceptable. I agree. Which is why these changes are necessary. But I'd welcome Westridge's input as we implement them. Perhaps you'd like to designate someone from your office to consult with our community relations team. The suggestion of inclusion seemed to mollify Bennett somewhat. I think that would be appropriate. My office manager, Diane Powell, has been with us for years. She has an excellent understanding of our clients' expectations. Perfect. I'll have Peterson contact her this week. Marshall extended his hand. I appreciate your engagement, Mr. Bennett. Lakeside's success depends on balancing the needs of all its community members. After Bennett left, Elena approached with a knowing smile. Smooth handling of the old guard. But he's not convinced yet. No, he's not, Marshall agreed. But involvement may help bring him around. And if not, Westridge's lease comes up for renewal in 18 months. By then, Lakeside will be a different kind of building. As the atrium cleared, Robert Whitfield approached, his expression carefully neutral. Quite a vision you've presented, Mr. Townsend. The question now is implementation. That's where I'll be counting on your expertise, Mr. Whitfield. You know this building's operations better than anyone. Whitfield nodded, acknowledging the compliment but still reserved. I've managed Lakeside according to certain standards for a long time. Some of these changes will require adjustment on my part. Marshall studied him. Are you telling me you're not on board? I'm telling you I'll need time to align my management approach with your new vision, Whitfield replied diplomatically. If I may be frank, some of these initiatives strike me as addressing problems that don't exist. Lakeside has been a successful, prestigious property for decades. For some people, Marshall corrected. For others, it's been a workplace where they're treated as less valuable, less visible, less worthy of consideration. Those are real problems, Mr. Whitfield, even if they haven't been on your radar. Whitfield's expression tightened slightly. I've always prided myself on running a professional operation where everyone understands their role. And that's exactly what needs to change. The assumption that understanding your role means accepting differential treatment based on that role. Marshall softened his tone. Look, I value your experience and knowledge. Lakeside needs your skills. But it also needs your willingness to see things differently, to question practices that have been taken for granted. And if I find that difficult, then we'll have further conversations about whether Lakeside is still the right place for you. Marshall kept his tone matter-of-fact rather than threatening. But I hope it won't come to that. I think you care about this building and the people in it more than you care about maintaining hierarchies. Whitfield didn't respond immediately, seeming to genuinely consider Marshall's words. Finally, he said, I've scheduled a department heads meeting for tomorrow morning to begin discussing implementation. I assume you'll want to attend. I will. Thank you for taking that initiative. As Whitfield walked away, Peterson approached. Sir, there's a small issue at the service entrance. Some deliveries were delayed by the snow, and they're all arriving at once. Elena could use some additional help. Let's go, Marshall said immediately, following Peterson through the building to the service area. The scene at the service entrance was controlled chaos. The narrow receiving area was crowded with delivery personnel trying to navigate hand trucks loaded with packages, supplies, and equipment. Elena was calmly directing traffic, checking manifests, and answering questions in multiple languages, but she was clearly overwhelmed. Marshall didn't hesitate. He removed his suit jacket, hung it on a hook, and stepped up beside Elena. Where do you need me? She looked surprised but grateful. Those packages need to be sorted by floor. Manifest clipboard is on the desk. For the next hour, Marshall worked alongside Elena and the regular service entrance staff, sorting deliveries, signing for packages, and helping coordinate the flow of people and goods. He was conscious of the surprised looks from delivery personnel who weren't accustomed to seeing someone in a dress shirt and tie handling packages, but he ignored them, focusing on the task at hand. By the time the rush subsided, Marshall had developed a new appreciation for the logistical challenges of the service area. The space was inadequate for the volume it handled, the equipment was outdated, and the staff was clearly understaffed. This happens every day, he asked Elena as they took a moment to catch their breath. Monday mornings are worst. But yes, this is normal. She gestured around the cramped space. Design flaw from the beginning. The architects made the front lobby 3 stories high with marble everywhere, but they treated this area as an afterthought. Marshall nodded thoughtfully. Not anymore. I'm moving this renovation to the top of the list. We need to expand this space, update the equipment, and add staff. The budget for that would be significant, Elena cautioned. So is the cost of inefficiency and poor working conditions, Marshall countered. This isn't just about being fair, it's about making the building function better. As he put his jacket back on, preparing to return to his temporary office on the executive floor, Marshall noticed a young woman standing just inside the service entrance, watching him with interest. With a start, he recognized his daughter Alyssa. "Dad," she said, looking both amused and impressed. "Mom always said you weren't afraid to get your hands dirty, but I thought she meant metaphorically." Marshall laughed, embracing her. "What are you doing here? I thought you were coming this afternoon. Classes were canceled because of the snow, so I came early. The security guard at the front said you might be back here." She looked around the service area with academic interest. "This is perfect for my case study, seeing the contrast between this entrance and the main lobby." Elena approached, curiosity in her eyes. Marshall made the introductions. "Elena, this is my daughter, Alyssa. She's doing a project on organizational change for her university course. Alyssa, this is Elena Novak, 30-year veteran of Lakeside and now co-director of our Community Relations Department." "I've heard so much about you," Alyssa said, shaking Elena's hand. "Dad says you're the heart of the building." "Your father exaggerates," Elena replied with a smile. "But I've been here a long time. Seen a lot of changes. None as interesting as what he's trying to do now." "That's exactly what I want to study," Alyssa said enthusiastically. "Would you be willing to talk with me about it? Your perspective would be incredibly valuable." "I'd be happy to," Elena agreed. "But right now, I need to get back to work. Why don't you come by tomorrow afternoon? We can talk then." As Elena returned to her duties, Alyssa turned to her father with a thoughtful expression. "You know, when you told me about changing the building, I thought it was mostly symbolic, a statement about inclusion. But seeing this space compared to the front lobby, it's so much more concrete than that." Marshall nodded. "That's what I've been learning this past week. It's not just about who uses which door. It's about who has adequate working space, whose comfort is prioritized, whose needs are considered in planning and budgeting. The entrance policy is just the beginning." Have you ever noticed the stark differences between front of house and back of house in businesses or buildings you visit? Share your observations in the comments about how these differences reflect deeper values and priorities. Over the next 2 weeks, Marshall's vision for Lakeside Tower began to take shape through concrete actions. The renovation of the service entrance area commenced, with temporary arrangements made to maintain functionality during construction. Peterson and Elena developed new security protocols that maintained building safety without discriminating based on appearance or role. And department by department, staff received training on the new community standards. Not everything went smoothly. Some tenants, particularly those who had been in the building longest, resisted the changes. A few complained directly to Whitfield, attempting to leverage their long-standing relationships to maintain the status quo. Others were more subtle in their opposition, expressing support publicly while finding ways to circumvent the new policies in practice. One afternoon, Marshall was reviewing architectural plans for the service area renovation when Peterson knocked on his office door, looking troubled. "Sir, we have a situation I think you should be aware of." Marshall set aside the plans. "What's happened?" "We've received complaints from several maintenance and custodial staff. Apparently, some tenants have been requesting that these employees continue to use the service elevator and entrance, despite the new policy. When the staff members explain the change, they're being told, that may be the official policy, but we prefer things the old way in our space." Marshall frowned. "Specific tenants, or general?" "Primarily 3 firms, Westridge Partners, Harmon and Associates, and Clayton Financial. All long-term tenants, all on the upper floors." Bennett's resistance isn't surprising, Marshall mused. "Who's delivering these requests?" "Usually mid-level managers or office administrators, not the principals," Peterson replied. "But the staff believes the directive comes from the top." Marshall considered this information. Direct confrontation might cause these prestigious tenants to consider leaving when their leases expired, which would have significant financial implications. But allowing them to undermine the new policy would send a clear message that the changes weren't serious, that power and money could still dictate who belonged where. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Peterson. I'll handle it personally." After Peterson left, Marshall called Elena. "I need your insight on something. Can you come up?" When Elena arrived and heard about the situation, She nodded knowingly. I'm not surprised. You're challenging how things have always been done, and that makes people uncomfortable. Especially people who benefited from the old way. How would you approach it? Elena thought for a moment. These are status-conscious firms. They care about their image and their relationships with clients. Direct confrontation might make them defensive. But what if you reframed it as an opportunity for them to demonstrate leadership in creating a more inclusive environment? Appeal to their desire to be seen as progressive and forward-thinking. Interesting approach, Marshall acknowledged. I was considering something more direct, but your suggestion has merit. What if we did both? I'll meet with the principals one-on-one to clarify expectations, but we'll also create a public recognition program for tenants who fully embrace the new community standards. Carrot and stick, Elena said with approval. I like it. Marshall scheduled meetings with the managing partners of all three firms for the following day. Jonathan Bennett from Westridge was first, arriving precisely on time for their 9 a.m. appointment. Mr. Townsend, he greeted Marshall with professional cordiality. What can I do for you today? I wanted to discuss some concerning reports that have come to my attention, Marshall began, keeping his tone conversational but direct. It seems that within Westridge's offices, staff are being instructed to continue using the service entrances and elevators, contrary to our new building policy. Bennett showed no surprise at this information. I wouldn't characterize it as instructions. We've simply expressed a preference for maintaining certain professional protocols within our space. A preference that contradicts explicit building policy and puts staff in the uncomfortable position of having to choose between following official guidelines and pleasing an important tenant. Bennett leaned back slightly. Mr. Townsend, Westridge has been in Lakeside Tower for 12 years. We pay a premium for our space, and we have certain expectations about how our office environment functions. I understand that, Marshall replied. And I value Westridge as a tenant. That's why I wanted to address this directly rather than through building management. The community standards we're implementing aren't arbitrary or cosmetic changes. They're fundamental to creating an environment where everyone is treated with dignity. And I respect that intent, Bennett said smoothly. But surely you understand that different areas of the building have different needs and standards. Our clients would be surprised to learn that their financial advisors insist on separate doors for people based on their job titles. Marshall interrupted, his tone still measured but with an edge of steel. Because in today's business environment, that kind of practice isn't just outdated, it's potentially damaging to your reputation. Bennett's expression hardened slightly. Are you threatening us, Mr. Townsend? Not at all. I'm offering perspective. Westridge promotes itself as a forward-thinking firm that values diversity and inclusion. In fact, your latest annual report highlights your commitment to creating an equitable workplace. Marshall pulled out a printed page from Westridge's own publications. Your clients include numerous foundations and institutions that prioritize social responsibility. How would they view these preferences you're maintaining? The implied threat was clear, though never explicitly stated. Bennett was silent for a moment, reassessing the situation. What exactly are you asking for, Mr. Townsend? Full compliance with Lakeside's community standards, starting immediately. And beyond that, I'd like Westridge to take a leadership role in our building-wide initiative to create a more inclusive environment. Your influence among other tenants is significant. Bennett studied him, clearly calculating his options. And if we were to embrace this role, as you suggest? Lakeside is creating a corporate community leadership recognition program to highlight tenants who exemplify our values. Westridge would be featured prominently in our marketing materials and would have priority consideration when additional premium space becomes available. Marshall smiled slightly. I believe the corner offices on 48 will be opening up next year when Denton Media's lease expires. The mention of the highly desirable corner offices was not accidental. Bennett's interest was visible despite his attempt to maintain a poker face. I'll need to discuss this with my partners, he said finally. But speaking personally, I see the value in what you're proposing. Times are changing, and Westridge prides itself on being ahead of the curve. After Bennett left, Marshall had similar conversations with the principals from the other two firms. By the end of the day, all three had reluctantly agreed to comply with the new policies, though their degrees of enthusiasm varied. The promise of public recognition and prime real estate had proven effective incentives. That evening, Marshall met Alyssa for dinner to hear about her progress on her case study. She had spent the past 2 weeks interviewing staff at all levels of Lakeside Tower and was bubbling with insights. "Dad, this is turning into the most fascinating project. The perspectives are so different depending on who you talk to and how long they've been in the building." She pulled out her notebook. The maintenance supervisor who's been there for 20 years sees the changes as revolutionary. The new receptionist at Clayton Financial doesn't understand what the big deal is. To her, it's obvious that people should be able to use any entrance. "That generational difference is interesting," Marshall observed. "It is. And there's something else I've noticed. The resistance isn't just coming from executives. Some of the service staff are uncomfortable with the changes too. Elena says it's because they've internalized the hierarchy, become used to invisibility as a form of protection." Marshall nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. When you've adapted to a certain way of being treated, change can feel threatening even if it's ultimately beneficial." "Exactly. One of the custodians told me, 'I don't want to use the main elevators. The executives look at me like I don't belong there, and it makes my job harder.' It's going to take time for those attitudes to change on both sides." Marshall absorbed this insight. "So what's your assessment of our approach so far? What could we be doing better?" Alyssa considered the question seriously. "I think you're focusing a lot on the physical changes and policy changes, which are important. But there's a cultural element that needs more attention, creating opportunities for genuine interaction across hierarchical lines. People need to see each other as individuals, not just roles." "That's an excellent point. Any specific suggestions?" "Actually, yes. Several people mentioned that the building used to have annual events where everyone participated, holiday parties, summer picnics. But over the years, they evolved into separate events for different levels. What if you brought those back as unified celebrations? Create contexts where people interact as equals." Marshall smiled with pride at his daughter's insight. "I think that's a fantastic idea. Would you be willing to share your research and recommendations with Peterson and Elena? It would be valuable input for the community relations team." "I'd love to," Alyssa replied enthusiastically. "In fact, this project has got me thinking about my career path. I've been planning on corporate law, but seeing how organizational structure affects people's daily experiences, their sense of dignity and worth, I'm wondering if there might be more meaningful applications of a law degree. Such as maybe labor law, or working with companies on creating more equitable workplace policies." Alyssa looked slightly embarrassed. "I know it sounds idealistic." "It sounds like your mother talking," Marshall said softly. "She always believed that success meant nothing if it didn't create opportunity for others." Alyssa reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I've been thinking about her a lot while working on this project. She would have loved what you're doing at Lakeside." "She would have done it better," Marshall admitted with a smile. "Your mother never had to learn compassion or consideration for others. It was built into her from the beginning." "I'm still working on it. Don't sell yourself short, Dad. The changes you're making aren't just symbolic. They're improving people's daily lives in tangible ways. That matters. If our story of positive change resonates with you, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Your support helps us share more narratives about transforming workplaces and communities through dignity and respect. 3 weeks after Marshall's acquisition of Lakeside Tower, the first phase of physical renovations was completed. The service entrance had been expanded, brightened with better lighting, and equipped with updated technology for package processing and security. Most importantly, the stark contrast between the front and back of the building had been reduced, creating a more unified aesthetic that still maintained the building's prestigious image. To mark this milestone, Marshall organized a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Unlike traditional corporate events that might have been attended only by executives and officials, he insisted on including representatives from every department and level of the building's operations. Elena and Peterson had worked together to ensure that the timing would allow attendance by both day and night shift workers, with overlapping ceremonies to accommodate different schedules. As Marshall prepared to cut the ribbon across the renovated entrance, he looked at the diverse gathering, executives in suits standing alongside maintenance workers in uniform, security personnel chatting with office managers, cleaning staff who had adjusted their hours to attend. It wasn't perfect integration. People still naturally clustered with their colleagues and peers, but it was a beginning, a visual representation of his vision for Lakeside as a community rather than a hierarchy. "Before we officially open this entrance," Marshall said, addressing the group, "I want to thank everyone who has contributed to this transformation. This isn't just about a more functional or attractive space. It's about creating a building where every entrance, every elevator, every area acknowledges the dignity and value of everyone who works here or visits here." He gestured to Elena, who stood nearby. 30 years ago, Elena Novak began working at this entrance, greeting thousands of people who keep Lakeside running but were rarely acknowledged by those in the front lobby. Today, we recognize that Lakeside Tower isn't defined by its prestigious address or its architectural features, but by its people, all its people. With that, he cut the ribbon, to applause from the gathered crowd. As people began to move through the new entrance, examining the improvements and enjoying the provided refreshments, Marshall noticed James Peterson in conversation with the security guard who had directed him to the service entrance on his first day. The two appeared to be having an intense but constructive discussion, with Peterson occasionally gesturing toward the new space. Robert Whitfield approached, looking somewhat less reserved than he had in previous weeks. "Impressive transformation, Mr. Townsend. The contractors completed it on schedule and under budget, which is practically unheard of." "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Your oversight of the project was invaluable." Whitfield hesitated, then added, "I've been meaning to tell you, the feedback from tenants has been largely positive. Even some who were initially resistant have commented on the improved efficiency of deliveries and service calls." "I'm glad to hear that. It supports what I've been saying all along. These changes aren't just about equity, they're about creating a better functioning building for everyone." Whitfield nodded, then seemed to make a decision. "Mr. Townsend, I want to acknowledge something. When you first announced these changes, I was skeptical. I've managed buildings for 25 years, and certain divisions between front and back of house seemed natural to me. But seeing how these first changes have been implemented and the positive response from most quarters, I'm beginning to understand your vision more clearly." This was the most direct expression of support Whitfield had offered since Marshall's acquisition. "I appreciate that, Robert. Your experience and knowledge are essential to making these changes work. We need people who understand the traditional operations but are open to evolving them." Just then, Elena approached with an older woman Marshall didn't recognize. "Marshall, there's someone you should meet. This is Beverly Wilson. She was the first black receptionist hired at Lakeside Tower back in 1975. The woman, elegantly dressed with a crown of silver hair, extended her hand. "Mr. Townsend, I wanted to come see these changes for myself. I worked in this building for 27 years and retired in 2002. In my day, I wasn't allowed to use the executive elevators, even though my desk was in the main lobby. Had to walk all the way around to the service area if I needed to go upstairs." Marshall shook her hand warmly. "It's an honor to meet you, Ms. Wilson. You were a pioneer here." Beverly smiled, the lines around her eyes speaking of hard-earned wisdom. "Pioneers take the arrows, Mr. Townsend. But we clear the path for those who come after. What you're doing here, making all doors open to all people, that matters more than you might know. Would you consider coming back to speak at our first building-wide community event next month?" Marshall asked. "Your perspective would be invaluable, especially for the younger employees who might not understand the history behind these changes." "I'd be honored," Beverly replied. "Some stories need to be remembered, so we don't slide backward without noticing." As the event continued, Marshall circulated through the crowd, listening more than speaking, observing the interactions between people who might never have spoken to each other under the old system. There were awkward moments, certainly, but also genuine connections being formed. A security officer discovering he had children the same age as a marketing executive, an office manager learning that a maintenance worker had valuable insights about improving her department's heating issues. Near the end of the event, Marshall found himself face-to-face with James Peterson, who appeared energized by the day's success. "Sir, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity you've given me. These past few weeks have been challenging but incredibly rewarding. I've learned more about this building and the people in it than I ever knew as a security officer." "You've done excellent work, Peterson. The new security protocols maintain safety while eliminating the biases of the old system, and your training programs for the staff have been well received. Peterson hesitated, then said, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. That first day, when I directed you to the service entrance, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was something I did regularly, based on split-second judgments that I now realize were deeply flawed." "I suspected as much," Marshall replied. "That's why I wanted you for this role. You've experienced both sides of the equation, enforcing the old system and now transforming it. The hardest part has been facing how many people I affected with those snap judgments," Peterson admitted. "But it's also been the most valuable lesson. I can't undo those interactions, but I can make sure they don't continue happening. That's all any of us can do, acknowledge where we've been wrong and work to make it right going forward," Marshall said. "The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us." As the event wound down and people returned to their duties, Marshall took a moment to stand alone in the renovated entrance area. The physical changes were significant: better lighting, more space, updated technology. But what mattered more were the intangible shifts beginning to occur in how people interacted, in who felt welcome where, in whose comfort and convenience were considered worthy of investment. His phone buzzed with a text from Alyssa. "Sorry I couldn't make the ribbon cutting, stuck in class." "How did it go?" He texted back, "Better than expected. Change is happening, slowly but surely." Her response came quickly, "One door at a time, right?" "Proud of you, Dad." Marshall smiled, pocketing his phone as he prepared to return to his office. One door at a time, indeed. And more importantly, one mind at a time, one interaction at a time, one small shift in perspective that, multiplied across hundreds of people, could transform not just a building but the community it contained. 2 months after Marshall Townsend's acquisition of Lakeside Tower, the changes were no longer novel but had begun to integrate into the building's daily operations. The service entrance, now officially renamed the East Entrance, was as well maintained and staffed as the main lobby. Security protocols had been standardized across all entry points. And most importantly, people throughout the building were growing accustomed to seeing each other in spaces where they previously wouldn't have encountered one another. There had been resistance, of course. 2 smaller tenants had chosen not to renew their leases, citing changes in building culture as their reason for relocating. A few longtime executives still visibly stiffened when sharing elevators with maintenance or custodial staff. But for the most part, the transformation was progressing steadily, with growing acceptance and even enthusiasm from many quarters. On a bright spring morning, Marshall stood in his office, preparing for a meeting with potential new tenants, a tech startup that had specifically sought out Lakeside because of its reputation for innovative workplace practices. As he reviewed their proposal, Robert Whitfield knocked on his open door. "Mr. Townsend, do you have a moment?" "Of course, Robert. Come in." Whitfield entered, carrying a folder and looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I wanted to discuss something with you before the quarterly board meeting next week." Marshall gestured for him to sit. "What's on your mind?" "I've been reviewing our performance metrics since implementing the new community standards and operational changes." Whitfield opened his folder, revealing charts and data. "The results are not what I expected." "In what way?" "Maintenance request fulfillment is up 22%. Tenant satisfaction with building services has increased by 17%. Staff turnover in service positions has dropped from 33% annually to just 7% in the past quarter." Whitfield looked up from the data. "And most surprisingly, inquiries from prospective tenants have increased by 40%, with many specifically mentioning our new approach to workplace equity." Marshall smiled. "That doesn't sound like bad news." "It's not," Whitfield admitted. "It's just not what I anticipated. I was concerned that these changes might impact our prestige positioning in the market or alienate our traditional client base. Instead, it appears we're attracting a new demographic of tenants who value these principles, without significantly losing our established base. People respond to authenticity and fairness, Robert. Even in business, perhaps especially in business, where those qualities are sometimes in short supply." Whitfield nodded slowly. "I've been in property management for over 2 decades, Mr. Townsend. I've prided myself on understanding what makes a premium commercial property successful. But I'm beginning to think I had an incomplete picture." "We all did," Marshall replied. We've been operating within a system that defines success narrowly: occupancy rates, rental income per square foot, prestigious addresses. But buildings aren't just assets, they're communities. And healthy communities require more than financial metrics to thrive. I've come to a similar conclusion, Whitfield said, straightening slightly. Which is why I wanted to propose expanding the Community Relations Initiative to our 3 other properties in the downtown area. This was unexpected. Whitfield had been respectfully compliant with the changes at Lakeside, but hadn't previously expressed interest in broader application. That's an excellent suggestion, Marshall said. Would you be willing to oversee that expansion? Your experience implementing these changes at Lakeside would be invaluable in adapting them to other properties. I would, actually. Whitfield's professional reserve softened slightly. I've been reflecting on my career lately. I've achieved the traditional markers of success: managing prestigious properties, maximizing returns for owners. But these past 2 months have shown me a different kind of impact I could have. Creating workplaces where people's dignity isn't determined by their job title or which entrance they use. That's a legacy worth building. As Whitfield left to prepare for their upcoming meeting with the tech startup, Marshall remained at his desk, reflecting on the conversation. Whitfield's evolution represented exactly the kind of change he had hoped to inspire, not just compliance with new policies, but a genuine shift in perspective that could ripple outward beyond Lakeside Tower. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Townsend, Elena Novak is here to see you. Send her in, please." Elena entered, looking more formal than usual in a tailored suit rather than her customary practical attire. "Good morning, Marshall. I wanted to update you on the Community Council election results." The building-wide Community Council had been another of Alyssa's suggestions, a representative body with members from every level of building operations and tenant organizations, tasked with ongoing review of policies and practices that affected the Lakeside community. "All positions have been filled," Elena continued. "We have representatives from executive tenants, professional staff, building operations, security, and maintenance. The first meeting is scheduled for next Wednesday." "Excellent," Marshall replied. "Who was elected chair?" "That's the interesting part." Elena smiled. "Beverly Wilson." "Beverly? But she's retired." The council decided to create a special position for an independent chair, someone who knows the building but doesn't currently work here. Someone who can provide historical perspective while being neutral in current operations. Beverly was elected unanimously. Marshall nodded appreciatively. "That's inspired thinking. Her experience and wisdom will be invaluable." "There's something else," Elena added, her expression turning more serious. "I've been offered a position as Community Relations Director for a major hospital network. They're trying to address equity issues in patient care and staff treatment, similar to what we've been doing here, but in healthcare." "That sounds like an excellent opportunity," Marshall said, though he felt a pang at the thought of losing Elena's insight and experience. "When would you start?" "That's the thing, I'm torn." Elena sat down across from him. "I believe in what we're doing at Lakeside. I've invested 30 years here. But this new role would allow me to apply what we've learned to an environment where the stakes are even higher, where these kinds of hierarchies can literally affect patient outcomes." Marshall considered her situation. "You know, when I acquired Lakeside, my goal wasn't just to change one building. It was to create a model that could be replicated, that could influence how other organizations approach these issues. Your taking this hospital position would be exactly that kind of ripple effect." Elena looked relieved. "You're not disappointed." "Quite the opposite. I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful that what we've started here has already begun to spread beyond our walls." He smiled. "Besides, you've trained Peterson well. He's ready to lead the Community Relations Department, with the right support." As they discussed transition plans, Marshall found himself thinking about ripples in a pond, how one small change could spread outward in ever-widening circles. What had begun as a personal response to being misjudged at a building entrance was evolving into something much larger, with potential impact far beyond what he had initially imagined. Have you witnessed how a single change in policy or practice can transform an entire organization or community? Share your story in the comments about a time when one adjustment created surprising ripple effects. In the weeks that followed, these ripple effects became increasingly visible. The story of Lakeside Tower's transformation began to attract attention beyond the building itself. A local business journal published a feature article about the changes, highlighting the improved operational metrics and increased tenant interest. This led to inquiries from other property managers and business owners curious about implementing similar approaches in their own organizations. Marshall found himself invited to speak at a commercial real estate conference, sharing the Lakeside model as a case study in how equity-focused practices could enhance rather than detract from a premium property's value and appeal. The reception was mixed. Some attendees were skeptical, others intrigued, but the conversation had begun. Even more significant were the changes occurring within Lakeside itself. The Community Council had begun its work in earnest, meeting regularly to review policies and recommend adjustments based on input from all levels of the building community. One of their first actions was to create a recognition program for inclusive excellence, highlighting individuals and departments that demonstrated exceptional commitment to the new community standards. The inaugural recipient was, somewhat surprisingly, the night cleaning crew supervised by Maria Gonzalez. Their selection recognized not only their technical excellence in maintaining the building but also their initiative in redesigning cleaning schedules to minimize disruption to late working tenants, a change that had significantly improved relationships between office workers and custodial staff. At the award ceremony, held in the building's atrium to ensure accessibility for all shifts, Maria spoke with quiet dignity about what the recognition meant to her team. "For many years, we were invisible in this building," she said, her voice steady despite her evident emotion. "We did our work at night, when most people were gone. If someone was working late and saw us, they often acted as if we were intruding in their space. Now, we are seen as essential partners in making Lakeside function well. This award is not just about our work, it's about our place in this community." Marshall, watching from the side of the atrium rather than the stage, felt a deep satisfaction at her words. The changes were taking root, becoming part of the building's culture rather than imposed policies. People were beginning to see each other differently, not as roles or functions, but as individuals contributing to a shared environment. After the ceremony, as people mingled over refreshments, James Peterson approached Marshall with a young man in a security uniform. "Mr. Townsend, I'd like to introduce Miguel Ramirez, our newest security officer. He joined us last month as part of our expanded team." Marshall shook the young man's hand. "Welcome to Lakeside, Miguel. How are you finding it so far?" "It's been great, sir," Miguel replied with evident enthusiasm. "Officer Peterson's training program is unlike anything I experienced at my previous position. There's such an emphasis on treating everyone with respect, regardless of why they're in the building." Peterson smiled. "Miguel came to us with excellent technical qualifications, but what really impressed me was his natural ability to make people feel welcome while still maintaining appropriate security protocols. He's already received compliments from several tenants." "That's the balance we're striving for," Marshall agreed. "Security without prejudgment, professionalism without artificial barriers." As Peterson and Miguel moved on to greet other attendees, Marshall found himself approached by Jonathan Bennett from Westridge Partners. Bennett's initial resistance to the changes had gradually evolved into reluctant compliance and, more recently, cautious engagement. "Congratulations on a successful event, Mr. Townsend," Bennett said, his tone cordial if not warm. "The cleaning crew was an interesting choice for the first award." "The selection was made by the Community Council, not by me," Marshall pointed out. "But I think it was inspired. Maria's team exemplifies exactly the kind of excellence we want to recognize. Technical proficiency combined with innovative problem-solving that benefits the entire building." Bennett nodded slowly. "I've noticed the difference in our offices. The cleaning is still excellent, but now it's coordinated around our late meetings rather than interrupting them. It's a small thing, but it makes a significant difference in our workflow." "Sometimes the most meaningful changes are in those small, daily interactions," Marshall observed. "How are things going with the new entrance policy? Any concerns from your clients?" "Actually, no," Bennett admitted. "Once we explained it as part of Lakeside's commitment to operational efficiency and community values, most clients found it quite reasonable. A few have even commented positively." He hesitated, then added, "One of our biggest clients, the Reynolds Foundation, specifically mentioned that they appreciate doing business in a building with such progressive policies. Apparently, it aligns with their own organizational values." Marshall smiled slightly. It seems the changes might be good for business after all. In some ways, yes, Bennett acknowledged. Though I still have reservations about certain aspects. But I'm willing to admit that my initial concerns about client reactions were largely unfounded. As Bennett moved away to speak with colleagues, Marshall reflected on the significance of his partial conversion. Bennett represented the old guard of Lakeside's tenant base, traditional, hierarchical, concerned with appearances and status. His gradual acceptance of the changes, even if motivated partly by client preferences, was an important indicator of their sustainability. The event concluded with beverages and conversation in the atrium, deliberately scheduled to overlap the day and evening shifts so that employees from both could participate. Marshall observed with satisfaction the increasingly natural interactions between people from different departments and levels. Executives chatting with maintenance staff, security officers engaging with office managers, cleaning crew members being introduced to tenants they usually never saw. As he prepared to leave, Marshall was approached by Beverly Wilson, whose role as community council chair had quickly established her as a respected elder stateswoman within the Lakeside community. "A successful evening, Mr. Townsend," she said, her eyes bright with approval. Maria and her team were deeply moved by the recognition. "The council made an excellent choice," Marshall replied. "How are you finding your role as chair?" Beverly chuckled. "Busier than I expected retirement to be, but deeply satisfying. When I worked here, I never imagined a day when someone who looked like me would be chairing a council that includes the building's top executives." "Times change," Marshall observed. "They do, but not on their own," Beverly countered. "They change because people make them change, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable." She studied him with knowing eyes. "You've started something important here, Mr. Townsend. Something that goes beyond doors and elevators to the heart of how people see each other and themselves." "That was the goal," Marshall acknowledged. "Though I'm just building on the foundation laid by people like you, who persevered when the barriers were much higher." Beverly nodded, accepting this truth. "Every generation has its work to do. Yours is taking what we started and expanding it, making it normal rather than exceptional." She patted his arm. "Don't underestimate how significant that is." As Marshall walked through the main lobby toward the exit, he noticed the security officer at the front desk, a young woman he hadn't met before, greeting each person with the same attentive respect, regardless of their appearance or apparent role. No assumptions, no directions to other entrances, just a consistent professional welcome. Outside, the spring evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of newly blooming flowers from the planters that lined the building's exterior. Marshall paused, looking up at Lakeside Tower gleaming in the twilight. The physical structure was unchanged, still an imposing edifice of glass and steel rising 50 stories above the city streets. But what happened inside those walls was evolving, becoming more aligned with the values he believed in. His phone rang, Alyssa calling to check on the awards ceremony. As he described the event and Maria's moving speech, his daughter's pride was evident even through the phone. "Dad, do you realize what you've created? It's not just a building anymore, it's a model. My professor wants to expand my case study into a formal research project that could be published in a business ethics journal. People want to understand how you've made these changes work in a premium commercial property." "It's not just me," Marshall replied. "It's Peterson and Elena, the community council, people like Beverly Wilson who bring historical perspective. And your suggestions about creating opportunities for meaningful interaction across hierarchical lines have been instrumental." "Maybe," Alyssa conceded. "But it started with you refusing to accept being directed to the back door. Small moments of dignity matter, Dad. They can change everything." As Marshall ended the call and began walking toward his car, he reflected on his daughter's words. Small moments of dignity. His mind flashed back to that first morning, the security guard pointing him to the service entrance without even looking up, the cold wind on his face as he walked around the building, the momentary hesitation as he decided not to identify himself but to experience what others experienced daily. What if he had reacted differently? What if he had immediately asserted his status, demanded respect based on his position rather than his humanity? The guard would have apologized, perhaps been reprimanded, and nothing fundamental would have changed. The system that sorted people by appearance, that determined their value and visibility based on assumptions, would have continued unchallenged. Instead, That small moment had catalyzed a transformation that was now reaching beyond Lakeside Tower to influence other organizations, other communities. Elena taking her expertise to the hospital network. The Business Journal article inspiring other property managers. Alyssa's case study potentially shaping future business leaders' understanding of workplace equity. As he reached his car, Marshall's phone buzzed with a text message from Peterson. "Just wanted to let you know, the security officer who directed you to the service entrance that first day just finished training a new class of officers on our revised protocols." His personal story about reassessing assumptions was the most powerful part of the session. Marshall smiled, typing a quick response, "Perfect example of how we grow through our mistakes when we're willing to learn from them." As he drove home through the Chicago evening, Marshall felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The work was far from complete. Cultural change was never a destination but an ongoing journey. There would be setbacks, resistance, new challenges as the building's population evolved. But the foundation had been laid for a community where dignity wasn't a privilege granted based on position or appearance, but a right accorded to everyone who walked through its doors, any of its doors. He thought about his father's words on that long-ago day, "No door can make you less than what you are. And someday, you'll walk through any door you choose." Now, because of one small stand for dignity that had grown into something much larger, others would walk through those doors too, seen for who they were rather than what they appeared to be. If this story has inspired you, take one moment to subscribe to our channel for more narratives that explore the power of dignity, respect, and meaningful change in our communities. Your support helps us share stories that matter. On a bright Tuesday morning 1 year after Marshall Townsend's acquisition of Lakeside Tower, the Chicago Tribune published a feature article titled, "The Lakeside Model: How One Building Changed Its Culture and Inspired a Movement." The piece detailed the transformation that had occurred over the previous 12 months, from the equalization of entrances to the formation of the Community Council to the measurable improvements in building operations and tenant satisfaction. What had begun as one man's response to being misjudged had evolved into a comprehensive approach to workplace dignity that was now being adopted by organizations across the city and beyond. The Lakeside model, as it had come to be known, had been implemented in varying forms at hospitals, universities, hotels, and corporate campuses, each adaptation preserving the core principle that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and treated with respect, regardless of their role or appearance. Marshall read the article in his office at Lakeside, feeling a complex mixture of pride and humility. The story highlighted his initial vision but emphasized how that vision had been expanded and enriched by the contributions of many others. Peterson's security protocols, Elena's insights before her departure for the hospital network, Beverly Wilson's wisdom as community council chair, and countless suggestions from staff at all levels who had embraced the opportunity to reshape their workplace. A knock at his door interrupted his reading. "Come in," he called. The door opened to reveal James Peterson, now fully settled into his role as Director of Community Relations. "Good morning, Mr. Townsend. I saw the Tribune article, quite comprehensive." "They did their homework," Marshall agreed. "Have you seen the responses online? The comment section is surprisingly positive." "I have," Peterson confirmed. "But I'm actually here about something else. The Community Council has completed their annual review and has a proposal they'd like to present at next week's building-wide meeting." "What kind of proposal?" Peterson smiled slightly. "They'd prefer to present it themselves. But I can tell you it involves expanding our model beyond Lakeside's walls in a new way." Marshall raised an eyebrow. "Now I'm intrigued. Any hints?" "Let's just say they've been inspired by your emphasis on creating opportunity, not just equality. They're thinking about how Lakeside as a community can extend that opportunity to the surrounding neighborhood." Before Marshall could press for more details, his assistant buzzed his intercom. "Mr. Townsend, your daughter is here to see you. Send her in, please." Alyssa entered, looking professional in a tailored suit, her final presentation materials for her now expanded research project tucked under her arm. Peterson excused himself with a promise to provide more information about the council's proposal later. "Dad, have you seen the Tribune?" Alyssa asked excitedly, placing her portfolio on his desk. "Just finished reading it," Marshall replied, gesturing to the newspaper. "They did a good job capturing the evolution of the changes here." "They did. And the timing is perfect for my presentation tomorrow. The publicity adds credibility to my research findings." She opened her portfolio, revealing charts and data analyses. The metrics are impressive, Dad. Workplace satisfaction up across all departments. Maintenance requests addressed 30% faster. Tenant retention improved despite slightly increased rents. And the most interesting finding, employee sick days reduced by 22%, which suggests improved workplace well-being. Marshall studied the data with interest. These are compelling numbers. Have you been able to isolate which factors had the most significant impact? That's the fascinating part, Alyssa replied, flipping to another section of her presentation. It wasn't any single policy change, but the cumulative effect of physical improvements, procedural changes, and most importantly, cultural shifts. When people feel seen and valued, their relationship to their workplace fundamentally changes. And that translates to measurable business outcomes, Marshall observed. Exactly. Which is why I've already had inquiries from 3 different companies interested in consulting services based on my research. Alyssa looked slightly embarrassed. I haven't even graduated yet, and I'm being asked to advise on organizational change initiatives. Marshall smiled with pride. That doesn't surprise me at all. You've developed expertise in an area that many organizations are struggling with: how to create more equitable workplaces without sacrificing performance. In fact, showing how equity enhances performance. Alyssa nodded enthusiastically. That's the key insight. This isn't just about doing the right thing, though that matters. It's about creating more effective, resilient organizations where people at all levels can contribute their best. As they continued discussing her findings, Marshall was struck by how far the initial spark had traveled. What had begun as a response to a personal slight had ignited his daughter's professional passion, shaped her career trajectory, and now promised to influence organizations far beyond Lakeside Tower. Later that day, Marshall took the elevator down to the east entrance, formerly the service entrance, to meet with a potential new tenant. The space had been completely transformed from its earlier state. Gone were the cramped quarters, harsh lighting, and utilitarian design. Now, the entrance featured the same quality materials and thoughtful layout as the main lobby, with additional facilities specifically designed to accommodate delivery and service functions efficiently. Elena's replacement, a former hospitality manager named David Chen, greeted Marshall warmly. "Good afternoon, Mr. Townsend. Ms. Rodriguez will be arriving in about 15 minutes. Would you like to wait in the conference room?" "Actually, I'll wait here if you don't mind, David. I enjoy seeing the operations in action." David nodded, returning to his duties coordinating the afternoon deliveries. Marshall observed the smooth flow of activity: courier services dropping off packages, maintenance contractors checking in, food deliveries being efficiently processed. What struck him most was the quality of interactions. Every person, regardless of their role, was greeted by name when known or with attentive respect when new. The hierarchical barriers that had once segregated the building's population had dissolved, replaced by professional courtesy that acknowledged each person's contribution to the building's function. A familiar face appeared: Maria Gonzalez, now promoted to Facilities Services Manager, overseeing all custodial and maintenance operations. "Mr. Townsend, good to see you at this entrance. Most owners still use the front." Marshall smiled. "I like to alternate. Keeps me connected to all aspects of the building's operations." "Well, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to thank you for approving the new training program for our team. 3 of our staff have already completed the technical certification courses, and 2 have been promoted to supervisor positions with better pay. The investment in your team's skills benefits everyone in the building," Marshall replied. "Better trained staff, better service for tenants, better career opportunities for your people. It's the definition of win-win." Maria nodded, her expression serious. "In my 30 years of cleaning buildings downtown, this is the first place that has ever invested in us this way, seeing us as people with potential, not just pairs of hands to empty trash and clean bathrooms." As Maria continued to her next task, Marshall reflected on the significance of her words. The physical changes to the building were visible and tangible: renovated spaces, updated systems, new signage. But the more profound transformation was in how people experienced their place within the lakeside community. Whether they felt valued, whether they saw themselves as having dignity and agency, whether they believed their contributions mattered. Think about a time when you felt truly seen and valued in a workplace or community. How did that experience change your engagement and contribution? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The potential tenant, Sofia Rodriguez, arrived precisely on time. As CEO of an emerging sustainable technology company, she had specific requirements for her office space: modern infrastructure, environmentally responsible operations, and perhaps most importantly, alignment with her company's values of equity and inclusion. "Mr. Townsend," she greeted him, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for meeting me personally. I've heard a lot about what you've created at Lakeside." "It's been a collective creation," Marshall corrected gently. "I may have set the initial direction, but what you see today is the result of contributions from people throughout the building." Sophia nodded appreciatively. "That collaborative approach is exactly what interests me. Our company culture emphasizes flattened hierarchies and distributed decision-making. We need a physical environment that reinforces rather than contradicts those values." As they toured the available office space on the 32nd floor, Sophia asked thoughtful questions about more than just the physical amenities. She wanted to understand how the community council functioned, how building policies were developed and revised, how staff at different levels were engaged in operational decisions. "What I'm seeing here is rare," she observed as they concluded the tour. "Most premium properties offer luxury and prestige, but they're fundamentally hierarchical. They make some people feel important by making others feel invisible." "That was exactly the dynamic we set out to change," Marshall replied. "We believe that true prestige comes not from exclusivity but from excellence, creating an environment where everyone can do their best work and be recognized for their contributions." Sophia smiled. "That's refreshingly aligned with our philosophy. I think Lakeside would be an excellent home for our team as we grow." She extended her hand. "I'd like to proceed with lease negotiations as soon as possible." After Sophia departed, Marshall made his way back up to his office, taking one of the elevators that had previously been designated for executive use only. Inside were two maintenance workers, a delivery person, and an executive in an expensive suit, all sharing the same space without the discomfort or awkward silence that might once have characterized such a mixed group. As he exited on the top floor, Marshall paused to appreciate the small yet significant moment. 4 people of different positions, backgrounds, and roles, briefly sharing space as equals. It was such interactions, multiplied hundreds of times daily throughout the building, that were gradually reshaping how people saw themselves and each other. In his office, Marshall found a message from Beverly Wilson asking if he was available for a brief conversation before the end of the day. He called her immediately. "Beverly, Marshall Townsend. I got your message." "Thank you for calling back so promptly," Beverly replied, her voice warm. "I wanted to give you a heads up about the community council proposal that Peterson mentioned. We're suggesting a Lakeside Tower Community Scholarship and Internship Program." "Tell me more," Marshall encouraged. "The concept is to create pathways for young people from underserved communities to gain education and experience that could lead to careers in property management, building operations, or tenant businesses. We'd provide scholarships for relevant education and paid internships within Lakeside itself." Marshall considered the idea. "That sounds excellent. What resources would be required?" "We've developed a detailed proposal with budget projections," Beverly explained. "The council recommends allocating a portion of the building's increased revenue from the past year, supplemented by voluntary contributions from tenants. Several have already expressed interest in participating, including Westridge Partners, surprisingly enough." "Bennett's coming around," Marshall observed. "Slowly but surely." "Indeed," Beverly agreed with a chuckle. "He approached me last week about having Westridge sponsor 2 internships specifically. Said something about wanting to diversify their talent pipeline." After concluding his call with Beverly, Marshall spent some time reviewing the community scholarship proposal she had sent. The program was thoughtfully designed, with clear objectives, structured mentorship components, and accountability measures. It represented exactly the kind of initiative he had hoped would emerge from the community council, addressing systemic issues of opportunity and access rather than just internal building policies. As the workday drew to a close, Marshall gathered his things and prepared to leave. He had dinner plans with Alyssa to celebrate the completion of her research project and discuss her post-graduation plans, which now seemed likely to include consulting work based on the Lakeside model. In the lobby, he encountered James Peterson having an animated conversation with Robert Whitfield and a visitor Marshall didn't recognize. Peterson waved him over. "Mr. Townsend, Perfect timing. This is Marcus Johnson, property manager for the Riverside Complex on the north side. He's interested in implementing some of our community standards in his buildings. Marshall shook Johnson's hand. We're always happy to share what we've learned, Mr. Johnson. Though I should warn you, this kind of transformation isn't a simple matter of changing a few policies. Johnson nodded seriously. So Mr. Whitfield was explaining. It requires a fundamental shift in perspective about what makes a building valuable and who contributes to that value. Exactly, Marshall confirmed. And that kind of change takes time, patience, and consistent reinforcement. There will be resistance, setbacks, moments when it seems easier to revert to old patterns. But the results are worth it, Whitfield interjected, with a conviction that still sometimes surprised Marshall coming from the once skeptical building manager. Not just in terms of operational improvements, but in creating a workspace where people at all levels take pride in their contributions. As the conversation continued, Marshall observed the natural way Peterson and Whitfield worked together, building on each other's points, sharing different perspectives on the lakeside transformation. These two men, one who had once directed Marshall to the back door based on appearance, the other who had initially resisted changes to the building's hierarchical structure, had become effective advocates for a new approach to workplace community. Later, as Marshall and Alyssa enjoyed dinner at her favorite restaurant, he shared this observation. It's like watching a chemical reaction, Alyssa suggested. You introduced a catalyst that transformed the existing elements into something new. Peterson and Whitfield haven't become different people, they've just reorganized their priorities and perspectives. Marshall nodded thoughtfully. That's an apt metaphor. And like a chemical reaction, once it reaches a certain point, it becomes self-sustaining. The changes continue to spread and evolve without requiring the same level of external energy. Exactly, Alyssa agreed, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. That's what's happening at Lakeside now. You're still providing direction, but the transformation has taken on a life of its own. The Community Council, the new training programs, the scholarship initiative, they're all emerging organically from the culture you've helped create. Marshall smiled at his daughter's insight. You've developed a sophisticated understanding of organizational change. Any company would be fortunate to have your perspective. Alyssa set down her fork, her expression growing more serious. Dad, I've been thinking about my next steps after graduation. Several consulting firms have made offers, and they're good opportunities. But, Marshall prompted, sensing hesitation in her voice. But I'm considering something different. The research I've done at Lakeside has shown me that these principles of dignity and inclusion can transform workplaces in ways that benefit everyone, from the most senior executives to the newest entry-level employees. She took a deep breath. I want to establish a non-profit focused on workplace equity consulting, helping organizations implement the Lakeside model while making it accessible to smaller businesses and community organizations that couldn't afford traditional consulting fees. Marshall studied his daughter, feeling a surge of pride. That's an ambitious vision. I know it won't be easy, Alyssa acknowledged. Starting any new venture involves risk, and non-profits have their own unique challenges. But I believe in this work, Dad. I've seen what it can do, not just at Lakeside, but in the organizations that have begun to adopt similar approaches. What would you need to get started? Marshall asked, his mind already calculating how he might support her vision without overstepping. Initially, office space, operational funding for the first year, and connections to potential client organizations. Alyssa hesitated, then added, I'm not asking you to fund it, Dad. I'm applying for several grants, and I have some savings. But advice and mentorship would be invaluable. Marshall reached across the table to take his daughter's hand. Alyssa, I couldn't be prouder of the direction you're choosing. And while I respect your independence, I hope you'll allow me to be one of your first supporters, not just with advice, but with practical resources as well. Her eyes brightened. Actually, I was hoping you might consider something specific. Lakeside has that small retail space on the ground floor that's been vacant since the bookstore closed. It would be perfect for a small non-profit office, visible, accessible, and symbolic of the principles we're promoting. Marshall laughed. You've already thought this through, haven't you? Consider it done. We'll work out a lease arrangement that helps you get started without compromising your independence. As they continued their dinner, Discussing the practical aspects of Alyssa's new venture, Marshall felt a profound sense of completion. His response to being misjudged that first day at Lakeside had grown into something far greater than he had ever imagined. A transformation of an entire building community, a model being adopted by other organizations, and now a new path forward for his daughter, carrying these principles into new environments. "You know," he said as they waited for dessert, "your mother would be extraordinarily proud of you." Alyssa's eyes glistened slightly. "I've been thinking about her a lot lately. Remember how she always taught me to look for the dignity in every person? How she would talk to the cashier at the grocery store about their family, or remember the names of everyone at your office, regardless of their position?" "She lived these principles naturally," Marshall agreed. "What we've been working to implement at Lakeside came instinctively to Christine." "That's why this matters so much to me," Alyssa said softly. "It's not just about workplace efficiency or even justice in the abstract. It's about honoring what Mom believed, that every person deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be treated with fundamental respect." The next morning, Marshall arrived at Lakeside Tower earlier than usual. He had a particular ritual in mind for the one-year anniversary of his acquisition of the building. The early hour meant the lobby was relatively quiet, with just a few early workers trickling in and the night shift preparing to leave. He deliberately entered through the east entrance, where Elena had first greeted him properly a year ago. The space was now bright and welcoming, with none of the stark contrast to the main lobby that had once existed. David Chen was already at his post, organizing the day's anticipated deliveries. "Good morning, Mr. Townsend," David said with a warm smile. "You're here early today." "Special day," Marshall replied. "1 year since the changes began." David nodded in understanding. "A lot has happened in that year." "Indeed it has. Is Maria's team still here? I was hoping to catch them before they finish their shift." "Break room on the lower level," David directed. "They should be there for another 15 minutes or so." Marshall made his way to the employee break room, another space that had been transformed over the past year. Once a dingy, utilitarian area with mismatched furniture and harsh lighting, it was now comfortable and welcoming, with quality amenities that demonstrated respect for the people who used it. Inside, he found Maria and her night cleaning team having their end-of-shift meeting. They looked surprised to see him but welcomed him warmly. "Mr. Townsend," Maria greeted him. "What brings you here so early?" "Today marks 1 year since I acquired Lakeside," Marshall explained. "I wanted to begin the day by thanking some of the people who have been instrumental in its transformation. Your team has been part of that from the beginning." He addressed the group, which included men and women of various ages and backgrounds, all in the same neat uniforms. "You were among the first to embrace the changes we've implemented. Your work maintains the building's excellence every night, often without recognition. But Lakeside wouldn't be what it is without your contribution." A woman in her 60s, Rosa, according to her name badge, spoke up. "Before, when we would see executives working late, we would try to be invisible, not disturb them. Now, they know our names. They ask about our families. It's a small thing, maybe, but it matters." "It's not small at all," Marshall assured her. "Those interactions, multiplied across hundreds of people every day, are what create a community rather than just a workplace." If you found meaning in Marshall's journey of creating dignity in everyday spaces, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring more stories of transformation and human connection to viewers everywhere. After spending time with Maria's team, Marshall made his way up through the building, stopping on various floors to speak with the early arrivals. Security personnel changing shifts, maintenance workers checking systems, office managers preparing for the day. At each stop, he took a moment to express appreciation for their specific contributions to Lakeside's community. By the time he reached the top floor, the building was fully awake, humming with the activity of a busy workday. As he walked toward his office, he passed a group of people gathered in one of the common areas. Representatives from different tenants and departments engaged in animated discussion around coffee and pastries. This was another initiative that had emerged from the Community Council. Informal monthly gatherings designed to foster connections across the traditional boundaries of floor, department, and position. Marshall paused briefly, noting with satisfaction the diverse makeup of the group and the easy manner in which they interacted. In his office, he found a small package on his desk with a note from Peterson. Found this while clearing out some old security files. Thought you might appreciate it as a milestone marker. Inside was a framed photograph of Lakeside Tower taken the day Marshall had acquired it, along with the original security check-in form from his first visit, the one where Peterson had directed him to the service entrance. Marshall smiled, appreciating both the symbolism and Peterson's comfort with acknowledging that pivotal mistake. He placed the frame on his desk, a tangible reminder of the journey they had undertaken together. The day continued with meetings, calls, and the usual business of managing a major property. But throughout, Marshall maintained an awareness of the anniversary significance. At lunch, he deliberately ate in the building's public cafe rather than ordering into his office, sitting at a communal table and engaging in conversation with whoever joined him. Today, an accountant from a mid-sized tenant firm and 2 members of the maintenance team. In the afternoon, he participated in a planning session for the upcoming implementation of the scholarship program. The discussion was led by Beverly Wilson, with participation from representatives of tenant businesses, building departments, and local educational institutions. What struck Marshall most was how everyone in the room, regardless of their position, contributed with equal confidence that their input would be valued. As the workday drew to a close, Marshall made his way down to the main lobby for the small anniversary gathering that had been organized. Nothing elaborate, just refreshments and brief remarks to acknowledge the milestone. As he approached, he saw that the space was filled with people from throughout the building, executives in suits mingling with maintenance staff still in uniform, office workers chatting with security personnel, cleaning crew members who had come in early to participate. Beverly Wilson approached, elegant as always in a tailored suit, her silver hair arranged in a dignified crown. "Quite a turnout," she observed with satisfaction. "People wanted to be part of this moment." "It's their achievement as much as mine," Marshall replied. "More so, in many ways." "True enough," Beverly agreed. "But it took your vision and persistence to create the conditions for change. Don't diminish your role in false modesty." After a few minutes of informal conversation, Peterson gently clinked a glass to get everyone's attention. "If I could have a moment," he called, his voice carrying easily through the lobby. "We're gathered to mark 1 year since Marshall Townsend acquired Lakeside Tower and began the transformation we've all been part of." The crowd quieted, turning toward Peterson and Marshall. "As many of you know, my relationship with Mr. Townsend began with a mistake," Peterson continued, a self-deprecating smile softening his words. "I judged him by appearance and directed him to the service entrance on his first visit to the building he had just purchased." A murmur of amusement rippled through the gathering. What I didn't know then was that this mistake would become the catalyst for transformation, not just of a building, but of a community and, for many of us, ourselves. Peterson looked directly at Marshall. "Your response to that moment, choosing to see it not as a personal offense but as a systemic issue that affected many people, revealed the kind of leader you are. On behalf of everyone at Lakeside, thank you for seeing possibilities where others might have seen only problems." Applause filled the lobby, warm and genuine. Marshall stepped forward, visibly moved by the moment. "Thank you, James. And thank you all for being here today." He looked around at the diverse gathering. A year ago, many of us wouldn't have been in the same room together. We might have worked in the same building, but we existed in separate worlds, divided by doors and elevators, by assumptions about who belonged where. He paused, gathering his thoughts. What we've created together is more than a more efficient building or a more pleasant workplace. It's a community where dignity isn't determined by position or appearance, where every contribution is valued, where people are seen as individuals rather than functions. Marshall gestured to the space around them. Lakeside Tower still stands 50 stories high. Its physical structure is largely unchanged. But what happens inside these walls has been transformed by each of you, by your willingness to question old patterns, to see each other differently, to create new ways of working together. He smiled, making eye contact with familiar faces throughout the crowd. This anniversary isn't an endpoint but a milestone on a continuing journey. The scholarship program launching next month, the consulting requests coming in from other organizations, my daughter's new nonprofit that will soon occupy space on our ground floor, these are all extensions of what began here, ripples spreading outward from our shared efforts. As the gathering continued, with people sharing stories and reflections on the year's changes, Marshall found himself approached by a young man he didn't recognize, casually but neatly dressed, with an ID badge from one of the tenant companies. "Mr. Townsend," the young man said, extending his hand. "I'm Michael Torres. I work in the mailroom at Clayton Financial." Good to meet you, Michael, Marshall replied, shaking his hand. Are you enjoying your work with Clayton? Very much, sir. But that's not why I wanted to speak with you. Michael seemed slightly nervous but determined. I wanted to thank you personally for the changes you've made here. I started working at Lakeside 8 months ago, after most of the new policies were already in place. But my father worked in building maintenance here for 15 years, until he retired last year. Marshall listened attentively, intrigued by this unexpected connection. He told me what it was like before, Michael continued. How he always used the service entrance, even when it meant walking around the building in the snow or rain. How executives would look through him as if he were invisible. How he was made to feel less valuable because of the work he did. Michael's expression grew more animated. When I told him I'd gotten a job at Lakeside, he was worried for me. He said, "Keep your head down, don't make waves." But what I found was completely different from what he described. People know my name. The community council includes someone from my department. I'm taking classes in business administration through the employee education program. I'm glad to hear your experience has been positive, Marshall said sincerely. It's more than that, sir. It's changed how I see my future. Michael stood a little straighter. I've applied to the new scholarship program to complete my degree. My supervisor is supporting my application. 5 years from now, I could be in management, maybe even at Clayton. As Michael moved away to rejoin his colleagues, Marshall felt the weight of his words. This was perhaps the most meaningful measure of their success, not just improving current conditions, but expanding future possibilities, opening doors that had previously been closed. Have you witnessed or experienced a workplace transformation that changed not just policies but possibilities? Share your story in the comments about how inclusive environments can create new opportunities and futures. The anniversary gathering gradually dispersed as people returned to their evening commitments. Marshall remained in the lobby, having quiet conversations with various building community members. Robert Whitfield was among the last to leave, pausing to speak with Marshall before departing. Quite a year, Whitfield observed, his usual reserve softened by the occasion. When you first shared your vision, I thought it was idealistic and impractical. I've never been happier to be proven wrong. Marshall smiled. Your implementation expertise made the vision workable, Robert. We might have had different starting perspectives, but we've ended up with shared goals. Whitfield nodded thoughtfully. The expansion to our other properties is proceeding well. Not without challenges, but the Lakeside experience has provided valuable lessons in managing resistance and demonstrating tangible benefits. And personally, Marshall asked, how has this year been for you? Whitfield considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Transformative, though I wouldn't have predicted that. I've been in property management for decades, priding myself on maintaining premium environments and maximizing returns. What I've learned at Lakeside is that true excellence includes how people experience the environment, not just aesthetically or functionally, but emotionally and socially. That's a profound insight, Marshall acknowledged. One that has changed how I approach my role, Whitfield admitted. And, if I'm being honest, how I interact with people in all contexts. Once you begin to see hierarchies and exclusions, you notice them everywhere. After Whitfield departed, Marshall found himself alone in the lobby as twilight descended over Chicago. Through the tall windows, he could see the city lights beginning to illuminate the early evening darkness, a constellation of human activity spreading in all directions. He thought about Michael Torres and his father, 2 generations of the same family experiencing the same building in profoundly different ways. He thought about James Peterson's journey from enforcing hierarchical distinctions to championing community integration. He thought about his daughter Alyssa, carrying these principles forward into new organizations through her nonprofit initiative. And he thought about Christine, his late wife, whose natural empathy and recognition of every person's inherent dignity had shaped both his values and Alyssa's. In many ways, the transformation of Lakeside Tower was a tribute to her influence, a manifestation of her belief that how we treat each other matters in every interaction, every day. As Marshall prepared to leave, he noticed the night cleaning crew arriving for their shift, checking in with David Chen at the security desk. Among them was a new face, a young woman who appeared to be receiving orientation instructions from Maria Gonzalez. The young woman looked somewhat nervous but determined, perhaps beginning her first job in a new country, as Elena had 30 years earlier. Maria noticed Marshall and waved him over. "Mr. Townsend, this is Lucia, our newest team member. She just arrived from Honduras last month and is learning English." Marshall extended his hand. "Welcome to Lakeside, Lucia. We're glad to have you join our community." David translated Marshall's greeting into Spanish, and Lucia's face brightened with surprise and appreciation at being welcomed personally by the building's owner on her first day. As Marshall walked toward the exit, he reflected on this small interaction, so different from what might have occurred a year earlier. Then, a new cleaning staff member would have been processed through the service entrance, given minimal orientation focused purely on tasks, and made to feel invisible to the important people in the building. Now, she was welcomed as a valued addition to a community where her dignity was assumed rather than earned through position or status. Outside, the spring evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of blooming flowers from the planters that had recently been installed around both entrances to the building. Marshall paused, looking up at Lakeside Tower gleaming against the darkening sky. The physical structure remained as impressive as ever, 50 stories of steel and glass rising majestically above the city streets. But now its exterior beauty was matched by an interior culture worthy of that grandeur, a community where every person could enter with dignity through any door they chose. If you found this story meaningful, please take a moment to subscribe and share it with others who might be inspired by Marshall's journey. Your support helps us create more content that celebrates the power of dignity and respect in transforming our communities. As we end our time with Marshall and the Lakeside community, I'd like to draw your attention to an even more powerful story appearing on your screen now. This extraordinary tale of courage and transformation will move you even more deeply than what you've just experienced. Click now to continue your journey with Stories That Matter.